Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere mai, and welcome to the Nichecache. We're from thenichecache.com, where you can read about all sorts of Aotearoa sporting matters. And if you really love your Aotearoa sport, you can sign up to our newsletter via Substack, thenichecache.substack.com. And that forms the foundations of our podcast chat. So we drop our weekly we drop a newsletter twice a week, every Monday and Friday, completely free. Just sign up. Then you get all the Aotearoa sporting information sent straight to you. And that Monday newsletter is really funky because we go hard on the back of the weekend sport. And then we use that to dive into the podcast chats. And I haven't jumped the gun this time because we do have the Women's National League Team of the Week in our Monday newsletter. So I imagine we're going to get the men's team of the week on Friday, the women's team of the week on Monday in the regular flow of our newsletter. Is that correct?
That's the plan for this week. I mean, which one goes on Monday and which one goes on Friday will be mix and match depending on which games, like which slot of games I finish watching first and can therefore judge first. So that might be the men's on Monday some week, might be the women's on Monday some week, but one or the other, I'll get around to both of them.
And of course, we will be chatting through some National League football. We've also got an all-white squad's just been named. We've got the Blackcaps shitting the bed. We've got the Breakers rocking and rolling. We've got NRL Grand Finals, NRLW Grand Finals, and we've got the Brisbane Broncos, who might just be the New Zealand Warriors. Funny that. Big podcast coming up for you today. We love Aotearoa. We love Aotearoa sport. And we are here to go deep into it all. If you do appreciate our mahi with the blogs, the newsletter, the podcast, the little clips, the highlights, anything you appreciate, you can support us straight up the guts through Patreon, buy me a coffee, and or a paid Substack subscription. So our free newsletter comes out every Monday and Friday evening via Substack. And then if you do appreciate it, if you want to support us directly, you can upgrade to a paid Substack subscription. And every Thursday we record our bonus subscriber podcast, which is only available on Patreon and for those with a paid Substack subscription. So we go pretty hard. We've got the Monday newsletter, we've got the big old Tuesday podcast, we've got the Thursday bonus podcast strictly for the folks on Patreon and with a paid Substack subscription. Come back at you on a Friday evening with the newsletter. Meanwhile, we're just whipping out the deep dives, going hard into Aotearoa sport for our website, thenichecache.com. And this is where we encounter the mindfulness. We have stumbled across some mindfulness. What have you got?
Well, I got to tell you that Ram Das has done it again. He caught me once more. I stumbled upon him and he trapped me with a very good one here that says, "The heart surrenders everything to the moment. The mind judges and holds back." And unfortunately, I felt that to be quite pertinent to myself recently, so I had to throw that one out there as well. Ram Das knows how to cut through. I'll say that for him.
Shout out to Ram Diggity. I was going to hijack your mindfulness though, because
hijacking Ram Das, surely not.
I've been trying to find some obscure bangers for just some end of season highlight montages of our glorious Kiwi NRL juniors, the NRL Wahine juniors, playing in Australia and in Aotearoa for the Warriors. And I did one for Sasaya Alatini, Christchurch Junior, who had a fantastic season with the Bulldogs. I was like, what's a good song? And I just came across the Goody Mob, the Black Ice. If anyone doesn't know, Goody Mob, they're from Atlanta, and they were right there with Outkast coming up in the early 90s. And I was about to throw some Andre 3000 mindfulness at you, because his verse, which I used for the Sasaya Alatini clip, is pretty ridiculous, pretty epic, pretty awesome. But it's kind of also cliche at this point when you're just like, wow, I found this amazing Andre 3000 verse. And it's like, yeah, add it to the list. You know, like, he's one of the best. And I'd also like, if anyone comes to me and they're like, yo, I found this amazing Andre 3000 verse, I'll be like, what about Big Boy? Because Big Boy's pretty decent as well. Like, I'm not here for any splitting between the Outcast forces. And I like them so much that I also love Goody Mob and the Dungeon family and all that stuff. But Andre 3000's verse is bonkers. And he does have a little note, a little reminder that is, I think, is pertinent at this time of year, because we just had daylight saving, what the season is changing. Spring is here. And there's just one, like, obviously I can't rap it, so I can't really give you the full effect. But he says, November just died, December's alive, thus it ain't no typical ride. That's what I'm feeling, like winter just died. And we've actually just started October. So we got September's just died, October's alive, thus it ain't no typical ride, and we're just entering spring. So there's a bit of Goody Mob, Outcast, Mindfulness to go with the Rum Diggity. And yes, I'm calling him Rum Diggity because got a bit of a hip hop flavor here.
He earned that. He had a long and fruitful life, and he earned the Rum Diggity, I think. So fair play to him. I reckon Andre 3K and Ram Dass would have got along quite well if they ever had the opportunity to meet while their paths crossed. I don't know if that ever happened, but it sort of feels like something that might have to like in the post Outcast wilderness years. So who knows? Who knows? We can at least imagine that unlikely, but also somehow not unlikely pairing maybe one day might have happened.
Definitely not.
If not in this life, then in the next life.
I appreciate how all the old school bangers are the best. There's not a lot of new music that is like, wowza, this is crazy. But I always, so you can go back and like, obviously there was that period where, I know, people were on all sorts of drugs, wigging out to crazy rock and roll, like heavy metal, whatever, like that type of stuff. But I'd sacrifice something to go back to the early 90s when Outkast and Wu-Tang Clan and were just emerging and just throwing out these crazy ideas, much of which still apply as observations of society in 2024. But that's a lot of waffle. That's a lot of musical jibber jabber. But I have one more. But I'm going to hold fire because I don't want to bring us down just yet when the New Zealand Breakers are 2-0 to start the NBL season. Credit where it's due. The Breakers have won their first two games in the NBL. They're second on the ladder. There's only one other team that is undefeated right now, and that is the Illawarra Hawks. They are 3-0. And the Breakers, they are in a nice little spot to start the season. There's a lot of shenanigans going on with the Breakers, as we know. But let's just zone in on what is working for the Breakers in these first two games, because they had a win over Southeast Melbourne, I think. And if I'm looking at it correctly, I don't want to pop the balloon, but Southeast Melbourne, they're 0-3, and the Brisbane Bullets, who the Breakers defeated in round one, they're 0-5. So the Breakers have 2 wins, and they are against the 2 worst teams in the NBL right now. However, my question to you is, what are the Breakers doing right to start the season?
Yeah, if you hadn't popped that balloon, I would have had to, because that is a valid point, is that the teams that they've beaten are 0-5 combined to start the season. And that, like, the Breakers are responsible for 2 of those 5 losses. So that's, it's early in the season where the one game makes a big difference to whatever standings look like right now. But that is a factor, is that the Bullets and the Phoenix have both not started very well. Like, not just in terms of the losses, in terms of how they're playing, it's been a little bit disjointed from both of them, and that's potentially something the Breakers have capitalized on. But at the same time, like, we thought the Breakers were going to be that team. We thought the Breakers were going to be struggling and not cohesive and and the type of side that other teams would come in and just like out of form teams would be able to beat them instead of it being the other way around. So yeah, no, credit to the Breakers where it's due. Of course, they've had two nice enough wins both times. It felt like they they had like they had a very good first quarter against Brisbane, and they had a very good third quarter. I think here they had a very good second and third quarter, and both occasions, the fourth quarter almost threatened to get away from them. They nearly threw away a huge lead against Brisbane. Against Southeast Melbourne, it was a lot closer, but they made it sketchy down the stretch there, but managed to hang on both times, which is something that in those preseason games they weren't doing. I think Coach Coppinen does deserve a fair bit of praise from how he's managed this roster so far. He like first of all he stuck with the winning formula. I think throwing Max Darling into start in both of these games has been risky. Could have been just a little spot thing, but he stuck with them in both of those things. I don't know if that's going to be a long-term solution, but at least it's getting them through the start of the season because Max Darling's just jumping in there and doing what's asked of him. He did get a shot attempt in this game, so didn't have any shot attempts in his 16 minutes in the first game. He did get a shot attempt against the Phoenix. Also sticking with Sam Meninga to start after he was so excellent in the first game, and then in a quieter performance or less sort of demanding of attention performance against Southeast Melbourne, I thought he was still really, really good. He was the only one who hit a three-pointer to start the game. They shot 1 of 10 to begin with from threes, and Meninga was the one who got the one. So that was cool. Freddie Gillespie was available for this game, did play off the bench, but Meninga still got the started minutes ahead of him. That's also, nice solid stuff from the coach. He's not overreacting to the import versus local kind of stuff. And the other thing I noticed from this Phoenix game is he gave 10 different players at least 10 minutes. And this was a game that was decided by 2 points. There was no garbage time. There was no sort of like all of those 40 minutes were valuable, and he used a 10-man rotation, which is a little bit nuts, but it's also like it makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways because they have I don't want to say they have a deep roster. I think it's that they don't have a very high-end roster. Therefore, everyone's kind of the middling players, and so everyone's getting middling minutes except for Parker Jackson Cartwright, which is fair enough. That stacks up, and you got a lot of dudes in there who are like, Jonah Bolden, Mojave King, these types of players who are capable of being outstanding NBL players, but have never shown or at least not recently shown with Bolden since he came out of retirement, and with Mojave King, that's just his career, like not showing the consistency sort of week on week kind of thing. And I think letting them earn, like giving them sort of a 10 to 20 minute baseline and letting them earn more or not from the start makes a lot of sense as well. So I quite like how he's handled what is a limited and a bit of a stretched roster, but I think he's handled it really well to get the most out of the team to this point. They don't look like a very good offensive team. They don't look like it's like their shooting numbers are pretty bad, but they're ripping in. They're defending quite well. They're playing with more cohesion than I expected to see under a new head coach. So it's positive enough. I still don't think this is a team that'll make the playoffs, but they have been better than most people, not just myself, but most people expected of them to start the season. And being 2-0 as they head off to play 3 completely meaningless, distracting, silly games in America to appease the owner it's as good a position as they could be in at this stage,
Would you conclude that the first 2 games, like they're playing like Kiwis? You said their offense wasn't like amazing. It wasn't super razzle dazzle offense attack, as we say in Aotearoa, the attack. But it kind of sounds like they're just doing the basics. They're just working hard, grinding through possessions, getting the rebounds. Is that a fair conclusion?
It might be too soon to say. I think
I'm just like 2 games. Like in these 2 games, what have they done?
I'm not sure because it's hard to tell the difference sometimes between a team that's doing the basics well versus a team that's trying to do the basics well, which is the same intent but is making mistakes. Because I think they are making mistakes out there. They would have lost this game to more teams than not, but Phoenix were just as bad shooting as they were. So it's Yeah, it's tricky to say, but I think I would lean on the side of yeah, potentially they are. They're showing a bit of that grit and heart and that those Stephen Adams qualities that Kiwi basketballers are known for, even though there aren't many Kiwi basketballers on this roster. But the two that are on the main roster have been starting, Max Darling and Sam Meninga, so I think that's got to have a fair bit to do with that.
But if there's not as many Kiwis on the roster as maybe we would like, I'm okay with that if the Breakers are embracing the Kiwi identity, the Kiwi flavor, and that's the reason I'm bringing this up, is because the Blackcaps aren't doing that. But hold that thought, because you did bring up Stephen Adams, and we did have a media day interview from Stephen Adams. What did you gather from Stephen Adams' first major press conference as a Houston Rockets player ahead of the NBA season?
Well, he only alluded to this idea a little bit, but he alluded to it enough to encourage me and an inkling that I had already had about this Houston Rockets team kind of being a do-over for him from what he had with the Memphis Grizzlies, where he joined the Grizzlies. They had this great core of young emerging players, and they look like a side that's just going to make steady strides into becoming a perennial contender. And they hit a wall a couple years into that, and don't really look like they can get over that. Maybe they will. Maybe they'll have a great season this year. I don't know. But it sort of felt like they were on track for something and they got about 70% of the way and then things got messy, partly because of their own problems and their own things that they couldn't get out of the way of. The Rockets feel like the situation he's joining them in feels very similar. And he mentioned something in his media day, but he feels like this is a really exciting team that has some championship potential down the line. And I don't know that he'll necessarily be around for all of that, but he's at least around to say, like, I was with the Memphis Grizzlies in this same situation. We took it to the next step. We didn't take it to the step after that. Here's what I learned. Here's what we can, here's the lessons to be taken from that. It feels like a little bit of a do-over for him in that way with the Rockets versus Grizzlies comparison. Only hopefully the Rockets will be better coached and with a few less sort of player egos getting in the way of things. So we'll see how that tracks. But as far as the injury goes, he said he's got no restrictions. He said he's still in his recovery protocol. It's kind of a 2-year thing, apparently. There's the getting back to play aspect, but there's also the managing it while you're playing aspect after you get back. So the word is he can play. There's no minutes restrictions, nothing like that. But he just has to be a little bit careful about what he does and not overloading things. And there might be some, I'd imagine, maybe not playing back-to-back games sometimes. It's hard to know what to expect of that until we actually get to see it. But the important thing is that he's cleared. All systems are go. He's ready to rock. He hasn't done a lot with the team yet because they've only done sort of informal practices. The official preseason hasn't started. So he was asked a few times about like his tactical fit and some of his new teammates, and he sort of like punted those questions, being like, "Ask me again in a month because I could give you an answer, but it wouldn't be necessarily the I don't know, the insightful answer that you might want. So ask me again in a month after preseason." I think that's a fair enough response, and look forward to seeing what that all begins to look like. But the most important thing of all is that Stephen Adams is cleared to play, man. He's back.
Big Steve-O. Far more positive vibrations with the Funaki compared to the Blackcaps. We might need to build this out because you can feel free to interweave any of your musical selections into our sporting chat, because there's a little known project from 50 Cent called Power of the Dollar, and I've been listening to it. And I actually listened to it while I was writing my Blackcaps versus Sri Lanka second test debrief. So it got me like pretty riled up. I had no issues saying the Blackcaps suck. And I had no issues saying New Zealand cricket kind of sucks right now. But it was the 50 Cent Power of the Dollar mixtape, or bit of an album, that really got me in the zone. to just fire up and kind of just rip into the Blackcaps. So if you do enjoy that early 50 Cent, because a lot of people say, you know, 50 Cent, Get Rich or Die Trying was a banger. And I think it was a banger. But he had a release prior to that. So Get Rich or Die Trying, which was like Indie Club, all that stuff, that was in 2003. But in 2000, I think we're talking 2000 here. Yes, in September 2000, he released Power of the Dollar. But he was like shot 9 times soon after that. So there was some issues with the release. But that is, I think that's 50 Cent at his best. So if you love 50 Cent, or that early 50 Cent, make sure you check out Power of the Dollar. Just search that up on YouTube. It will pop up. And this was in 2000. He's got like a couple nice features here. Bun B, Destiny's Child appeared, Noriega. So he was moving and grooving in New York prior to the release of Get Rich or Die Trying. But that's just a little bit of music for the freaks out there. And obviously it's pretty ruthless New York kind of hip hop. So you just be aware, you know, it's 50 Cent, you got to know what you're getting into there. Point being, that got me in the zone to just rip into the Blackcaps. But the thing that I want to set up and get your opinion on is, this isn't a moment to break down individuals. Kind of like, in a way, like Devin Conway scored runs, Mitchell Santner scored runs in the second innings, Tom Blundell scored runs, so they fixed all their form, right? Like everything's good there. Obviously, that is far more confusing and nuanced than that. But it also brushes aside the biggest issue. And then, like, you can say Tim Southey sucks as a captain. Gary Stead sucks as a coach. Anything individual with the Blackcaps team right now, I appreciate that you can identify that as a observation of where the Blackcaps are at. But the Blackcaps have lost 4 tests in a row. Either side of the 2 tests they lost to Australia and 2 tests they lost in Sri Lanka, they had a horrible T20 World Cup. During this period, the White Ferns have lost 10 T20s in a row. And over the last 5 years, like, the White Ferns have sucked. We've just been a full steak and cheese pie. The White Ferns have sucked over the last 5 years in both formats. So whatever you're thinking about the Blackcaps, the White Ferns are worse in both formats than the Blackcaps are in their 3 formats. But if we narrow it down to the last 2 weeks, we've got 2 losses for the Blackcaps in Sri Lanka. We got 3 losses for the White Ferns in Australia. And shout out to them, the New Zealand development woman. They are preparing to start the one-day section of their tri-series against Australia under-19s and Sri Lanka under-19s. But in the T20 section of that tri-series, they lost all 4 games. So over the last 2 weeks, New Zealand cricket teams have gone 0-9. That is New Zealand cricket right now. And I do have a specific observation about the Blackcaps where I think we can come up with our own term, like, you know, how Americans will say, oh, he's lost his fastball. Like, the Blackcaps, I think their mind powers, the culture, the tactics, the planning, the preparation, that was them bowling 145 Ks an hour with nibble. Now they're just 125K dibbly dobblers. Like, they have lost their tactical fastball, let alone the skill fastballs, let alone the form slumps that we know are happening. Because what happened between these 2 tests in Sri Lanka, they lost the first test, they were kind of competitive, that was all right. And then they selected the same team, conceded 600 runs for 5 wickets, declared, and scored 88 runs. we've seen, like in our lifetimes, we've seen some terrible Blackcaps phases, right? And over the last 5 years, I've seen some terrible White Ferns phases. Losing a test, selecting the same team, conceding 600 runs declared and only taking 5 wickets, then scoring 88 runs yourself has to be one of the worst Blackcaps phases that I can remember. And I don't like saying that because I'm probably the most optimistic, the most positive person about the Blackcaps. But yes, we know the bowling attack might not be as sharp as it once was. We know there are some heavy-duty form slumps where I think a lot of these batters might have got a bit too big for their boots. Because I think a few of them started to think of themselves as big donnies in international cricket. And that's all right when you're averaging over 50. When you enter Test cricket, you're averaging over 50. And this is a reminder of the true essence of being humbled. Because these lads weren't humbled by awards. Oh, I'm very humbled to win this award. They were humbled by being kind of shitty. And I think a lot of these Blackcaps players have been humbled by their performances. However, being humbled and the 3 stages of Blackcaps shenanigans, selecting the same team, conceding 600 runs declared, scoring 88 runs, like that is 3 stages of Blackcap shenanigans. Like, all of those things suck, and they're horrible to think about. But they merely fit into the wider theme of New Zealand cricket right now. And the thing that I framed my second test debrief with was that the New Zealand cricket identity is now losing. It's not that they are losing their identity. No, their identity is losing. They're 0-9 over the last 2 weeks. The Blackcaps had a horrible T20 World Cup. The Blackcaps have lost 4 tests in a row. The White Ferns aren't even a factor in international cricket right now. And who knows, they might turn it around to the T20 World Cup. We'll wait and see about that. But New Zealand cricket, they were doing some nice high-performance things. And I've tried to fight this off. Like, I've tried to believe in what New Zealand cricket are doing. Right now, their identity is just losing. Just losing cricket games, losing moments, losing wickets. Their identity, like the Blackcaps' identity, was great fielding, tactics, planning, preparation, team culture. That helped them overcome the fact that New Zealand's a tiny country. We shouldn't even be competing on the global stage in cricket the way we do. But some intangibles, some mana, some Kiwi things help them compete at the highest possible level. The Blackcaps haven't just lost all that because tactically they were terrible. They selected the same team and conceded 600 runs and then were all out for 88. Fielding, they were terrible. Like, Sri Lanka scored 600 runs because the Blackcaps sucked at fielding. Obviously not just that, but they created opportunities and those opportunities weren't taken. So the Blackcaps' identity is no longer true blue Kiwi. But the worst thing is the identity of New Zealand cricket right now is just straight up and down, full steak and cheese, losing.
Yeah, and before I dig further into that, just to highlight that some more, like 602 for 5 declared, 88 all out. That is a first innings deficit of 514. That's not just bad. That is the 5th worst first innings deficit in the history of Test cricket. The 5th worst. Like, that's over a century of cricket, and that's the 5th worst one. The worst ever was from 1938. England somehow had a 702-run lead ahead of Australia there. The third worst of all time was from 2002 when the Blackcaps played in Pakistan, and Pakistan were all out for 643 and the Blackcaps were rolled for 73. So it's not the Blackcaps' worst, but it's pretty bad. It's the fifth worst first innings lead in the history of Test cricket, and that alone should be reason to be like pretty terrified of the direction that they're heading in. Like, this was worse than 45 all out when Brendan McCullum was starting off in South Africa as captain. You remember that? Because at least that was only the bad batting innings. This was bad bowling and batting.
And bad selections, bad team management by the folks who are running that organization in Sri Lanka. As I just simmer down a bit, I'm on the simmer. I got to the boiling point, now we're just on a simmer to try and bring things down a level. Did you have any observations from the game? Anything stand out to you? Aside from the historical shitness.
Yeah, well, I haven't had my 50-cent bangers on, so hopefully I can keep this weirded, but because it was pretty bad. It was just like nasty. But I think I don't know. I thought it started with the point you just made there about selection. You know, I thought at that stage I was like, well, they had an opportunity to do something a little bit proactive and get out in front of what was a decent performance in the first test where they could have won, but ultimately a few things let them down. Okay, well, what do you do after that kind of test match performance? Well, surely you try to address the things that let you down so that you can win the next game. Instead, they just selected the same side. And I'm struggling really hard not to see that as a very, very, very symptomatic thing of what the entire situation has been, which is that word complacency again. And I don't know if maybe complacency isn't quite the right word, but it's something close to it. It's something that overlaps with that at least, because when pushed into a sort of semi-pressure situation where they had the chance to be proactive or to not be proactive, they chose to not be proactive. And they just seem to do this all the time at the moment. And there were times when, like, because in many ways, that was kind of the strength of this team when you got the sort of Hessen to Stead changeover, McCullum to Williamson changeover, when the Blackcaps kind of hit their peak, certainly as a Test cricket side, was that they didn't act first. They held back, they assessed information, and they made clever decisions based on that, whether that be pitch selections or pitch conditions or form selections or whatever it was, or just tactics from session to session. And like at the moment, like what worked 5 years ago the exact same approach just might not work anymore. Like, it might be that they've reached the shelf life of that. These teams are not like static things. They're constantly evolving, and what suited a previous incarnation of the Blackcaps might not suit this incarnation. And like, I don't know, like but it's not just the team is the issue. This is why I think I think your point is quite valid about the old, like the whole New Zealand cricket culture has been of losing lately, because there's just they went to the T20 World Cup, the Blackcaps did. We'll see what the White Ferns do with their T20 World Cup coming up very soon. But the Blackcaps went to the T20 World Cup.
Just quickly,
yeah, go.
White Ferns, they're doing big things. They had a win. They had a win at the in the warm-ups of the T20 World Cup session.
They won the game that didn't count. That's even worse than the White Ferns sweep.
So shout out to the White Ferns. They did what they usually do in winning games that don't mean nada, as you were.
The less they win, the less they mean, the more they win. Whereas like it's like, well, because what were we talking about after the T20 World Cup was how bad the preparation had been from the Blackcaps. It's like, let's not play warm-up games. Let's allow everyone to turn up from their side gigs 2 days before or whatever it was, or just like staggered throughout the week prior. And admittedly, the Sri Lanka series, they did have a warm-up. It was a test match against Afghanistan and they got rained off. So that wasn't ideal. But they're still doing the same thing where it's just like, I don't know if it means enough, you know. I don't know if the event of a test match means enough. This isn't like a specific player to player situation. I mean, like from the top down, because they've apparently they're just returning home now for a little bit. Players are flying back to New Zealand and then they're going back to India in a week or two to do that, which is in isolation, that's fine. But they're cutting not I don't know if cutting corners is right. It might be unfair to say cutting corners, but they're doing a lot to talk about players managing workloads, and it just feels like the way they do it is leaving the test match stuff to suffer so that guys can play T20 cricket as much as possible. And you're seeing some of the nursing stuff with contracts. And I haven't quite come around to how exactly I feel about this stuff, but it's information that I'm kind of gathering up. I think I do think this is like an organizational thing on down where the Blackcaps test squad is suffering from New Zealand cricket showing a level of malleability. I'm trying to think of what the right word is instead of complacency, because I don't think it's that. It's just I think they're being too accommodating and not treating the test matches as the sort of the next test match is your most important test match kind of thing. And this has affected the team in a bunch of different ways, because I think more specifically as far as the side goes, yeah, I think there are guys in there who feel like who have been allowed to feel, as this isn't their fault either, this is the way selections have done, have been allowed to feel like their place in the side is pretty safe. And they went like this again. This is something that's worked for them in the past, is allowing guys to play through their form slumps and giving guys time to adjust to test match cricket. But there is a balance as well. Like they did have to drop Henry Nicholls at some point, and they were in a position here ahead of the second test where maybe a couple of guys ought to have been shielded from the pressure because they just weren't quite performing, and instead it was just what do we do? What decision should we make? Let's not make a decision again. Like let's do nothing and see what happens. And they did nothing, and they got a performance that was basically the sum total of nothing. So like, congratulations, you got what you asked for to some extent. I don't know if this will be seen as a crisis point in Blackcaps Test history, the way that the 45 all out was, but I think maybe it should be, because these are not. This might be a culmination, but there were hints of this leading up for at least 12, maybe 24 months as well.
I think it is a crisis point, but again, you're going hyper focused on the Blackcaps. But it's the whole picture, the whole vista, the whole view
you're right.
is in crisis. So yeah, like I understand what you're saying about the contracts in Test cricket, but they were shit at the T20 World Cup.
Yeah, the contracts is a small issue.
Yeah.
But if anything, it might be a symptom within a thing. But yeah, because what have the White Ferns done to address their trajectory is also nothing. Like, let's just keep doing the exact same thing and wait until it works. You know, it's not going to. And the Blackcaps have got themselves into a situation as well. But yes, it's not a Blackcap specific issue. It's a top down kind of organizational thing. In theory, I guess.
But it's also not a Blackcaps Test cricket thing. It's not a Blackcaps. It's not a New Zealand cricket men's contract situation thing. It's the whole picture. It's Blackcaps being shit at the T20 World Cup, Blackcaps being shit at Test cricket, the management having, like, Devon Conway has a casual contract. He was graced with a casual contract, and there's no difference between Devon Conway and Henry Nicholls right now. Devon Conway is not a superstar. He just isn't. And that's what it is. But he's treated like a superstar. He's treated like he's the casual contract Kane Williamson next man up. But he's not. And it's what the thing I did enjoy about your spiel there was the White Ferns have literally done nothing. The White Ferns have been losing. I'm actually feeling a lot of similarities between what we're talking about here and what I want to talk about with the Broncos. Maybe I'll weave it in. But I do want to put the grand final NRL stuff on the pedestal. But I will weave in some Broncos ideas. Well, not yet, just yet maybe. Because the White Ferns have been losing with two different coaches. And at neither point, like Bob Carter stepped down and he walked straight into a job in New Zealand cricket. He wasn't given the flick. He wasn't fired for being shit. He
was promoted.
He was kind of promoted within New Zealand cricket pathways. So you can't say that that New Zealand cricket reacted to poor White Ferns results by firing the coach. They didn't do that. They changed coaches and the White Ferns kept losing. So there's been, like, they haven't done anything. They, me, you, we've all seen the White Ferns just keep losing. To the point where they are in a 10-game losing streak. To the point where they are losing T20 series to Pakistan in New Zealand. And you've noticed the same thing with the Blackcaps. The Blackcaps just don't change anything. I want to just do a little separation between, because I think the squad selected was a good squad. And the one change the Blackcaps have had, the one change the White Ferns have had as well, although it didn't influence anything to do with the T20 World Cup, I don't believe. They changed their selector. Sarah Sukikawa, believe is the name off the top of my head, so I don't have it right in front of me. They changed selectors there. The Blackcaps, they did change their selector. And the one thing that Sam Wells has done, he's brought in a lot of new players to that Blackcaps team, and I agree with what Sam Wells has done as the chief selector, because the best players for the Blackcaps are the new players he brought in. Will O'Rourke's the best seamer. Glenn Phillips is the best all-rounder. Rachin Ravindra is the best batter. Like, these are things that directly changed when Sam Wells started the job. But I don't think he's selecting the team test to test. I don't think he is influencing the skills, the tactics, the preparation. So I do think there's a difference there, and that is a positive wrinkle, because the best Blackcaps right now are the new young players. So at least we've kind of got that. Like, I think that is nice. But ultimately, New Zealand cricket's just watching these teams be like shit, and they're not doing anything. And like, I genuinely thought it was crazy to select the same team. Like, there's no, Tim Southee's the captain, but as we've talked about, they've got captaincy by committee. We were prepared, me and you. It seemed like a lot of media folks weren't prepared, but we were prepared. Nichecache listeners were prepared for Tim Southee to not play every test. There's no need for it. He's a seamer who bowls 130 k's per hour, and we're playing 6 tests in Asia. The Afghanistan test, you said it was a warm-up. It was not a warm-up. They could have lost that by the way they're playing right now. So credit to Afghanistan, no credit to the Indian groundskeepers. But Tim Southee, like, he isn't a certified first 11 player in these conditions. And it would have made complete sense for Tim Southee not to play this test. We talked about it on Thursday in our bonus subscriber podcast. We were talking about every change that could be made. How do you get Will Young into the team? How do you get Matt Henry, Ben Sears into the team? Is there something you can do with Michael Bracewell? I didn't expect all of those changes to be made. I thought there might be one change, maybe 2 changes, and there were no changes. So somehow we've settled on this observation that New Zealand cricket and the White Ferns and the Blackcaps, they don't make any changes even though they're losing. It's a very strange thing, but ultimately the thing that still irks me the most is this team just doesn't play like Kiwis. The fielding sucked. The tactics sucked. And I'm curious, what did you think about this? Like, there was Like, they were rolled for 88, so that's terrible enough as it is. But then, especially in the second innings, you see a bit of the positive intent. And I see a very fine line between positive intent, which everyone loves. Everyone loves a bit of positive intent playing attacking cricket. Like, it's one of the biggest buzz terms in cricket right now. But it kind of just felt like the Blackcaps were reckless. It felt like the Blackcaps weren't good enough to absorb the pressure, so the only thing they could do was try to hit out. Like, Devon Conway and Kane Williamson, they're at the crease, they're doing well, and they just put up these catches for the fielders. There is... Yes, positive intent is a thing. This Blackcaps test team, though, they have no... Like, they're soft. I said it last week, they're soft. Because they can't grind through adversity. The opposition bowlers are bowling well. You can have a positive defensive shot. You can rotate the strike. You can turn ones into twos. You can be aggressive with your mindset without trying to smash boundaries. But the Blackcaps, they don't have that backbone. They don't have that foundation of grit, of Kiwi. I don't really know what this means, but the number 8 wire, whatever, that type of thing. Like, we're just going to fight through this. We're going to do what BJ Watling did. Probably still does, because he's a gritty bastard, and he's probably still doing it in whatever he's up to now. Like, can someone in the Blackcaps team just see out a good period of bowling? Can they fight for their country in a cricketing sense? No, they just want to hit boundaries. That is the most baffling thing. And to me, it felt like they went from positive intent into, we're not good enough, so we're going to try and hit out. Now, that's all right if you're Tim Southee batting. That's all right if you're Will O'Rourke batting. But to be honest, Ajaz Patel was the main dude who showed grit with his batting. Everyone else just decided, I'm not good enough, so I'm just going to have a whack. I can't play any defensive strokes, so I'm going to try reverse everything. Like, cool, you got some shots, but New Zealand needs a positive result. And unfortunately, the way the Blackcaps played their cricket wasn't a good representation of Aotearoa, and it was actually kind of, funnily enough, it summed up the losing identity of New Zealand cricket. Boy, I'm coming in hot. There's a lot of strong language there.
Well, I mean, the idea that they're heading out because they feel like they can't defend. I mean, there were 3 innings prior to that 4th innings, the second innings of the second tier. So 3 innings before that in the series, that kind of proved that was true. So I think they were kind of justified and being aggressive. But then, yeah, it was like, what are you being aggressive for is the thing. Like, have you got a bigger picture in mind? Because one thing that they struggled with, even when they scored a few runs in the first test, was like, battling through those periods of good bowling. And part of the way to do that is to not get yourself in those situations in the first place by keeping the pressure on the bowler, by being able to score runs, by turning the strike over, rotating things around, but also hitting boundaries here and there, punishing the bad ball. And there was a lot of that just was going a little bit astray at times, which is part of why they didn't capitalize, particularly first innings of the first test, where they should have got a much bigger lead than they did, and they didn't. But like, when they started to get aggressive, it didn't feel like Tom Blundell, for example. I think it was because I think did he get out reverse sweeping in the second innings when he got 50 odd?
No, the second
one where he's at LBW.
Oh, yeah. Because you said Tom, so I was thinking Tom Latham, and somehow the gritty opener wasn't very gritty in this test. But also, yeah, Tom Blundell did try to reverse sweep a full toss that hit him on the pads on the full, I think.
Yeah, I think that's the one. Because from memory, I might be getting this wrong, but from memory, I think he had reverse swept a really nice boundary right before that. So I don't want to pick on Tom Blundell because he's not the only one who did this. It's just his example springs to mind. It's like you've played that shot, you've hit it really well, you've cashed in. Why are you doing it again? You know, like what was the point of it? Was the point because I have to try hit every ball for four because that's the way you're acting if you keep playing that shot over and over, or is the point I want to show the bowler something different to take him off his line so that I can move him into a plan where I'm dictating things in this bowler to batter relationship rather than the other way around? Were you trying to move a fielder around, saying, okay, there's no third man. Well, if I play this shot, they might put a third man in and take him away from a catching position. And then I've got a little bit more safety, that kind of thing. Because they weren't batting like that. There are a couple instances, a couple guys that felt like maybe, but then it's just, yeah. Because you can be playing the exact same shots, but with purpose of the bigger picture and how you're going to structure a long innings and intending to stay at the crease. I think Glenn Phillips actually did that all right when he was sticking around for a bit well, with Blundell actually in a little bit of a partnership in the last innings, but of course the game was long gone by then. But yeah, it's just I don't want to say they were trying to catch the tea time at the local golf club or anything like that because it's too dismissive. But it did feel like they knew they'd lost, so well, let's at least try put some runs up. But then maybe that's not the innings because of that reason. They had lost, they had lost at that point. Maybe that's not the innings we should focus on. So I don't know. I thought I thought the positive attempt was necessary, but I also thought they just didn't have balance with it, and they batted kind of shell shocked, and they probably deserve to be shell shocked after how they approached the first innings. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, at least with Latham, I can say because the grittiest thing about his opening is how well he leaves the ball, but that's all like seamers with a new ball, and the judgment he shows there. Here he's facing spinners with the new ball from the outset, and he should be more. But at least you can say it's a different situation to what he's used to. But yeah, I don't know. It was kind of all these things were just symptomatic from top to bottom. Like at one point, cause I agree. I thought Ajaz Patel was probably the grittiest batter in terms of how well he defended. And then you had a situation at the end there where like Mitchell Santner is shielding him from the strike. It's like maybe he should be shielding you from the strike. He's the only one who seems to be able to play a forward defensive against the spinners. So yeah, I don't know. It was just a disaster of a test match performance. And unfortunately, if they'd won that test match, then you say the first test was pretty good, didn't quite get there. They made adjustments in the second test. It makes the first test look quite good because it had the foundations of a victory. Instead, you had the first test now looks way worse than it was than what we would have felt about it a week ago because instead, this had the foundations of one of the worst defeats that the Blackcaps have had in modern history. So there's some things to be sorted out, but I wonder if maybe they might decide the old tried and true strategy of doing nothing about it when it comes to pick a squad and go to India next, where they're going to face the same conditions but on cocaine.
Who's doing cocaine?
Sorry, the 50 Cent stuff.
Yeah, right.
Crack cocaine. Sorry.
Varieties cocaine.
Well,
Tom Latham's coming up against spin, but don't feel about he doesn't seem as staunch against seam bowling these days either. And he was dismissed by Fernando in the second innings. He was Fernando's only wicket in the first innings, when they were rolled for 88. So he did get out to a seamer in that innings. Your point about this is the thing. I feel like they might have been upset by Afghanistan. I'm thinking that might have been a possibility, but we're saved about that. They lose both tests in Sri Lanka.
I actually wish we'd seen that now, because in light of what we saw afterwards, that would have been a really interesting test match.
India, they seem like they're just smoking Bangladesh. And you've got So an interesting comparison is you had Jacewell. He was going crazy last night. What did he finish up on? 72 at a strike rate of 141. First three batters for India, all strike rates over 100. Virat Kohli, 47, 134 strike rate. KL Rahul, strike rate 158. I only saw bits of Jacewell's innings. He looked like a test batter who had positive intent. He was hitting good shots to the boundary. And he was hitting good shots over the boundary. If you take a test batter who's good enough to play test cricket and be one of the best batters in the world, and you give them an attacking mindset, they will play good strokes. But those strokes are coming out of the middle of the bat and they're going straight to the boundary. And there might be 2 or 3 of them in the over. The Blackcaps just felt like they were trying to hit out. And that's the icky thing. But then now, so they swept in Sri Lanka. They're going to India where there's no way we can think they'll win a test. There's no evidence right now to think that they will win a test, and
not much evidence they can knuckle down and get a draw either.
That's what I was going to get to. They haven't shown any ability to fight to a draw either. So that's not looking good. Now, we do love to poke fun at England, and I'd love the Blackcaps to beat up India. I'd love the Blackcaps to beat up England. Nothing would make me happier. It's not going to happen. Because England, they don't have confidence issues. They don't have identity issues. England know who they are. They know exactly what they want to do. And they're led by a Kiwi. They're led by 2 Kiwis who are going to be coming to New Zealand. And they won a test in New Zealand last time. They only lost the second test by 1 run. England are not going to come to New Zealand and be timid. They're not going to come to New Zealand as underdogs. They're going to come to New Zealand with blood in the water. So yeah, it might be a cool period of test cricket. We've got 5, 3, 6, 9 tests to finish the year. That's cool. Well, one of them's gone. We lost the first 2, and there's every chance they don't get a win in the next 6. Crikey Jack. The Women's T20 World Cup does start in the next week or so. New Zealand, the White Ferns, they're starting on Saturday morning against India. And then they've got the Wednesday morning against Australia. So by next Wednesday, barring a miracle, the T20 World Cup might be over for the White Ferns. Now, I do want to use this as a chance to get into the rugby league. And I'm just battling this internal dialogue with myself, because I do want to put the Kiwi NRL Grand Final stuff on a pedestal, but I'm going to use this opportunity to segue into the Broncos. Because we've got the White Ferns, right? The White Ferns have been stink under 2 different coaches. The Blackcaps have had 1 coach, but they've had 2. Well, they were shit at the T20 World Cup and they've lost 4 tests in a row. So that is what it is. The Broncos, under this management, they decided that Wayne Bennett wasn't going to be their coach moving forward. They decided to appoint Anthony Seibold. That took them to a wooden spoon. They decided to fire Anthony Seibold and hire Kevin Walters, and that's led to Kevin Walters' 4 seasons as coach. They made the finals in 1 year. So when I see that, that tells you that the organization might be the problem. Because if you've got some boss men tings in the offices, Wayne Bennett finished 6th. He made the finals in 2018. They decided they didn't want him anymore. They decided to hire and fire Anthony Seibold. They decided to hire and fire Kevin Walters. So my point here is that when you have issues going across different coaches and across different playing groups, the people at fault are the people running the organization. And in this period, since they kicked out Wayne Bennett, the Broncos have made the finals twice in 6 years. So that tells you that the issue with the Broncos is probably the organization, the people running the organization. And I find that very interesting for a couple of reasons. First is the Kiwi NRL wrinkle, because the Broncos have a lot of excellent young players from Aotearoa in their system. The Broncos have a sneaky presence throughout Aotearoa. They got Jordan Ricky from Christchurch. They've got academies and little setups around Aotearoa. So I'm curious as to what the Broncos are going to do with that. And part of this is I just don't think the Broncos are the same big Donnies right now. And this gets back to one thing we love to talk about, like, especially in the NRL, because your club, because your team, your franchise, your organization, because they were good in the 1980s, everyone just assumes that they need to be good right now. They were a powerhouse. Not the Broncos were a powerhouse more recently. I was just exaggerating the 1980s. But you're a Dragons fan, right? So like the Dragons, I don't know when their dynasty was, the 1950s. They're a powerhouse.
1960s. 50s leading into 60s, let's be fair. We're talking 80s, I guess we're on that Raiders Eels kind of buzz, like the same story there. There's a lot of these teams that do say things like this about themselves. Broncos, I guess, was 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah. And it's a very Australian NRL thing to do, is to assume that a historically good team, a team that was good in a section of history, is still a powerhouse. Or that a team that was successful for a few years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever it was, a while ago, that it's good for the league when they're playing well. No. Like, the NRL is awesome.
There's a couple ideas that sounds like the good for the sport, good for the competition if they're doing good because they used to be good, sounds like Auckland Rugby. And because they were good in the past, therefore they should always be good, that sounds like Manchester United. So there's a lot of these examples around, but the NRL really knows how to boil down on these things.
But the NRL is awesome, and the Panthers have won 3 in a row.
Yeah.
Like, the NRL being good has no relationship with your club being successful. The NRL is just an awesome competition. And the NRL is at a peak. Like, the NRL is huge right now. And one team's been dominating. Like, it's all good. But people are putting the Broncos on a pedestal that does not reflect their results. And they're putting it on a pedestal which does not reflect the decisions made by the current administration, the regime. I think that may or may not have implications on a very good Kiwi NRL pathway for the Broncos. Like Xavier Willison, Dean Mariner, they were recruited from Aotearoa. Xavier Willison was recruited from nowhere. Like, he wasn't a big Donny in the rep teams. A lot of big Donny chat here. Forgive me for repeating that. But like, Dean Mariner was a very good player. Don't know if he was a dominant force in Aotearoa, but the Broncos recruited them, and it was fantastic recruitment. They've got more in their system. But I don't know if the allure of the Broncos is still there. Now, this is fascinating when you compare it to the Warriors. Because if we go the last 5 years, the Broncos have made the finals once. So they finished last in 2020, 14th 2021, 9th in 2022, 2nd in 2023, 12th this season. In that period, like the Warriors were worse, let's be honest. They were better in 2020, they finished 10th. 2021, they finished 12th, slightly worse than the Broncos. 2022, they were second to last, that's worse than the Broncos. Last year, they were worse than the Broncos. This year, they were slightly worse than the Broncos. If you go in that period, the Warriors have made the finals once, and the Broncos have made the finals once. I'm not sure if you're aware, but you've been living under a rock. You do get out in the bush. You do love a bit of hibernation out in the woods. Shout out to the woodsman. Shout out to the forest. Talk about you in a jiffy. There was a pandemic. And the Warriors...
No, I must have missed that one.
Yeah, righto. Yeah, fair enough. Lucky you. So the Warriors endured the pandemic. The Warriors had to move their whole organization to Australia. The Warriors... So we've got the Broncos, we've got kind of iffy leaders who have overseen a horrible period for the Broncos. Maybe just a reverting down to the rest of the NRL crew. In that period, the same folks in the Warriors, the owner that everyone seemed to hate before, Mark Robinson, Cameron George, the CEO, again, everyone had negative things to say about him. They helped the Warriors survive in the pandemic. They kept the Warriors alive in the pandemic. The Broncos didn't have to move much. There was they had bubbles in Queensland, right? Like, the pandemic phase seemed pretty easy for the Broncos. And yet they made the finals once. In this period, the Warriors had to move their whole organization, fight for survival, lose their junior teams, return to New Zealand, rebuild their organization in New Zealand, and they've had the same results. They made the finals once. The Broncos made the finals once. So I think that reflects pretty well on the Warriors' leadership at a time when there is serious, there's pretty clear evidence that the Broncos' leadership aren't all that. And I mean, I find it amazing that the Broncos and the Warriors have both made the finals in once of their last 5 years. And in that period, the Warriors had 3 years of just being ravaged by the pandemic. So shout out to the Broncos. You've got a similar result over the last 5 years as the Warriors, who faced far more adversity than the Broncos. I think the Broncos faced the least adversity during the pandemic. But it's the Warriors who did all that. They kept their business alive. They kept things afloat. And they made the finals once, just like the Broncos.
And adding to this slightly strange aspect of the picture is that it seems Michael Maguire is going to be the guy who replaces Kevin Walters at the Broncos, right? So you got the ex-Kiwis coach who left the Kiwis to coach New South Wales, and then after one Origin series, he's leaving New South Wales, I think. I assume he's not doing both because they were talking about releasing him from his contract to now be the Broncos coach, which is a weird hierarchy there, but it's like, I almost say it should be the other way around. Like, you're going from more reps to less to lower representative levels, but I guess that's more about full-time versus part-time. I don't know, but just another weird aspect on that. And hopefully that's a good thing for keeping those Kiwi pathways alive, is that Michael Maguire at least has a open line of communication with many, many players top and below.
But again, the issue for the Broncos isn't who's coach. The issue for the Broncos is who's appointing the coach. And that's my point here, comparing them to the Warriors. The Warriors' CEO, ownership, leadership kept the Warriors afloat, kept them alive, and I think they're doing a very good job. Where in the same period, the Broncos have hired and fired different coaches, and they've made the finals once, just like the Warriors. Given everything I just said, do the Broncos sound like a powerhouse? Because if the Broncos sound like a powerhouse, what does that make the Warriors? The Warriors are a powerhouse as well.
And what does that make the Panthers and the Storm in comparison?
Well, the funnier thing is, what does it make the Dragons? But we won't go there because the Panthers and the Storm, they are powerhouses of the NRL. And the common thread that I've got between them both is that, yes, like the Storm have an excellent spine. Pappenhausen, Munster, Hughes, Harry Grant. The Panthers, Nathan Cleary, Jerome Luai, Dylan Edwards, Mitch Kenny, like the spine isn't as fantastic, but you've got Cleary, just legendary stuff from Nathan Cleary. Mount Albert Jr., I think, Nathan Cleary. Hearty Kiwi, Nathan Cleary. Like what? Surely. Nathan Cleary, just come play for the Kiwis, bro. Like, you're all good. You can do it.
Imagine Nathan Cleary for the Kangaroos versus Jet Cleary for the Kiwis one day outcome, you know. Tear the family apart.
I'd rather have Nathan Cleary because he is the best halfback.
He is the best halfback of his generation. So, and
he's already done it. We're still waiting on Jet Cleary.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe the ship might have sailed with Nathan, but you know, but hey, maybe he'll end up moving to England like the fake rumors are saying, and he'll play for them, and we'll have to find another Cleary brother to play for Australia. I don't know.
You just introduced fake rumors that I've never heard of.
You haven't heard that? Someone will say because he's dating Mary Fowler from the Aussie women's football team, and she plays for Manchester City. So someone was like, it was one of the known ones, but it was like Buzz Rothfield or some one of them. Like, you know, they're all very compromised anyway. So they say things. It's like one person is saying this like it's a thing, but it's not, and everyone can see through it. But that person's still dumb enough to throw it out there. It's these are the murky waters we walk through sometimes trying to write about sports.
Do you know what I just listened to? And this is funny because on NRL 360, Braithen Astor, he's a player agent hosting NRL 360.
Yep. Speaking of compromises, yep.
Mediocre rugby league show that has a player agent hosting the show. But I was listening to another show, and Brent Reid openly said he doesn't want to talk shit about News Corp, who run Triple M, I think, or employ him at the Daily Telegraph because they own the Broncos. So that is why NRL media in Australia is untrustworthy and unreliable. Yet a lot of people hang on their every word. Don't know why. Anyway, Cleary's really good, but I don't know, like, he's sure, he's the best halfback of the generation, but Jerome Hughes is also a halfback who apparently is going to win the Dally M award. So that seems like he's the best halfback, you know, and he's from Wellington. Further evidence of Aotearoa's rugby league excellence throughout the regions when you've got Jerome Hughes, Nelson Asafa-Solomona, and Joseph Tapine are all from Wellington. So my common thread is that there's a lot of focus on the halfbacks and the halves and how they combine. Yet both teams have Kiwis who offer insight into the fundamental rugby league aspects that a lot of this discussion overlooks. And like the Storm are the best at it because they've got Nick Meaney, Josh King, Sean Bloor, Iliasaka Toa, like Trent Loiero. Do you even know who Trent Loiero is?
Only by name.
He's like him and Nick Meaney and Josh King are among the best NRL players this season, but they play for the Storm, and there's far better players at the Storm, but that's just typical Craig Bellamy getting the most out of his players. That spine for the Storm, they can only do what they do because they're rolling forward. So first things first, Nelson Asofa-Solomona won't be playing in the grand final. He's coming up against Fisher Harris, Moses Leota. Well, not anymore. That might be an issue for the Melbourne Storm. But I think Will Warbrick and Alec MacDonald are my focus points here. Will Warbrick, because everyone knows he's a fantastic athlete on the wing, try scorer, fast, he's got the swerve. Doesn't have the sidestep, but he's got a fantastic swerve, I reckon. But his carries to get the set started, incredibly valuable. Because him and Xavier Coates, that's where you get your momentum to start. Then you get Nick Meaney, then you get Jack Howarth. That's how the Storm get on the front foot. Then you get the forwards, and at the same time, you're mixing in Harry Grant, Hughes, Munster, Pappenhausen. Like, Pappenhausen isn't making 15 metres off a kick return. He's probably going to pass the ball, and he might pass it to Will Warbrick, and he's from Kawerau, and he's probably going to make his Kiwis debut this year. Alec MacDonald's the... Oh my God. This dude's awesome. He's probably one of my favourite Kiwi NRL players this year. Talked about him a lot in the newsletters and the podcasts. Doesn't get a lot of minutes. Like, he only had 29 minutes against the Roosters. He had 6 runs for 59 metres, 9.8 metres per run, 9 tackles at 100%. Now, in 2 finals games, MacDonald has 14 runs for 143 metres at 10.2 metres per run. And he's made 33 tackles at 100%. Not a lot of folks know who Alec MacDonald is. They don't know he's from New Zealand. They don't know that he is a bolter for the Kiwis. But he plays middle forward. And the Storm have Asofa-Solomona, Josh King, Trent Loiero, Christian Welch, Tui Kamikamica, and then there's little Alec MacDonald, who just rips in. He's not big, but he's pretty damn fast for a middle forward, and he just keeps showing up. I've talked about it for a long time. If he's leading the effort and intensity in a limited minutes bench role for the Storm, that's more effort, more intensity, better attitude than a lot of NRL players. And I think losing Asofa-Solomona is going to be an issue for the Storm, as it is for the Kiwis. But I think they've got enough big boppers. The Storm have enough big boppers, because Welch was coming off the bench, Kamikamika's coming off the bench, so they can inject one of those big boppers in. But MacDonald offers a different look. He's fast, he's agile, but you don't lose any defense because he's an excellent defender. That's something to watch out for with the Kiwis, because the Kiwis, Fisher Harris, Leota, Tapane, Noah Asofa-Solomona, but you got Griffin Neame, you got Leo Thompson, you might have Xavier Willison, like Nofahu White. There's a lot of big boppers there. And I still think MacDonald is an interesting bench player for the Kiwis. Because if it's international footy, it's not as clean, it's not as crisp. But I want MacDonald there just for his effort. You know that Alec MacDonald is going to absolutely rip in for the Storm, and you know he's going to rip in for the Kiwis if he gets that opportunity. Similar look for the Panthers, but far more illustrious. Because the Panthers have James Fisher Harris and Moses Leota. When I was getting into the Blackcaps stuff, that I was brainstorming, I was thinking, like, to me it feels like the runs and, yeah, mainly the runs that were scored were like empty stats. They didn't mean anything. Like, Conway scored runs, didn't mean anything. I'm not like, wow, Devon Conway's out, he's back in form. No, he scored a few runs, finally. And the Blackcaps got smoked.
Yeah, no one scored 100, but a bunch of guys got 50s in a second innings after you had the 5th worst first innings deficit in Test history. Those are pretty empty runs. I think that's fair.
Yeah,
if someone had gone on and got like 150 not out, then okay, yeah, no, that changes the picture. No one did that though.
Well, it also might have changed the results, and that's the point. But shout out to Devon Conway.
That was a pretty big deficit.
You got a 50, and the Blackcaps have lost 4 tests in a row. So that's like great stuff. But to me, it feels like empty stats. That's like the White Ferns, there's a lot of empty stats. Like someone scores a 50 in a losing game, and they've lost 10 in a row. So like, whip-de-doo. You could look at James Fisher-Harris and get the same idea. Well, no, sorry. Fisher-Harris is the opposite. Because his stats are actually quite low. Since 2020, these are his meters per game. 179, 149, 148, 130, 127. So he's, in the space of 5 years, he's gone from 179 meters down to 127 meters per game. His tackling has actually gone up. Well, it's hit a peak this year at 96.05% efficiency. And Leota, 2 finals games, he's played 37 minutes, 39 minutes. He's had 12 runs for 115 meters, 10 runs for 86 meters. In both finals games, these 2 lads are below 9.6 meters per run. So they're not even in contention for my magical 10 meter per run mark. So it's like, and in these finals games, Fisher-Harris 95.4% tackling, 95.6, Leota 89.4, 93.1. Good stats, but they're not Payne Haas stats. They're not Adam Fanua-Blake stats, but they win. And this is the thing about Fisher-Harris and Leota. I love the Storm. I really do. I love their whole organization. I love their connection to Aotearoa. I love the Kiwis that they have in their team. I love the Kiwis who have been in their organization since they started. They are the best sports organization in this corner of the world. But I want Fisher-Harris and Leota to be the starting props in 4 consecutive NRL championships. And the point I'm trying to make here is that they don't necessarily churn out the biggest stats, but they control the middle of the field. And if you're Nathan Cleary, if you're Isaiah Yeo, if you're Dylan Edwards, if you're Jerome Luai, what do you need to be done so you can execute your pizzazz? You need someone to control the middle of the field. And Fisher-Harris and Leota have done it for a long time. They've done it in 3 consecutive championship runs, and they're on track to do it for a 4th. That's what I love about Fisher-Harris and Leota. They're not averaging 10 meters per run. They're not taking 20 runs. I mean, Fisher-Harris, 43 minutes and 50 minutes. He's not playing massive game time. But when they're on the field, the Panthers are doing well. Because against the Sharks, it was like a grind for the first kind of 20 minutes when they were on the field. And then the Panthers started to pull away when they came back on the field. What happened in the Grand Final last year against the Broncos? Nathan Cleary gets into his wizard baggy, but that happens as Fisher-Harris and Leota are coming back for their second stints. These dudes control the middle of the field in the NRL. So if you're controlling the most ruthless area of the field in the most ruthless sporting competition, that makes you the most ruthless dudes. That's who they are. So shout out to them. Speaking of ruthless, Annessa Biddle, she is ruthless. The Sharks beat the Broncos in the NRLW semi-finals. Sharks were fantastic. And Annessa Biddle didn't do much with the ball. She did score a try, but it was her defense. Like every tackle, she was smashing someone. And I love Annessa Biddle from Aotearoa. She's awesome. She's going to play in a grand final now. Love to see it. The Sharks also have Brooke Anderson, who's an Aussie. And she is on track to play play at hooker for the Kiwi Ferns, I believe. She played last year. She plays a lock forward for the Sharks and also did a bit of hooker. She's an excellent rugby league player, I reckon. The Roosters, they were too good for the Knights. The Roosters had Otessa Pule, Amber Hall, and Tiana Davison. Like, the Roosters were good. Unfortunately, Warriors signing Maya Hill-Moana has dropped out of the top 17 for the Roosters, as they've started to win a lot of games, which is a bit weird. And in this game, Amber Hall had one tackle break and one offload. And I was watching the halftime or something like that, and they referred to Amber Hall as the cheat code. That's how good Amber Hall is. And she leads the NRLW on offloads. She's a tackle busting freak, but she had one tackle break and one offload, and the Roosters won. So that shows what the Roosters are up to. But all three of those players are in the forwards. Pule and Davison are in the middle. Amber Hall was on the edge. So now we've got an NRLW Grand Final. Sharks versus Roosters. I want the Sharks to win because I want Annessa Biddle to win. Let's get into some football to finish up here. Let's touch on this all-white squad. We got an all-white squad to play Malaysia and Tahiti at North Harbour Stadium early in October. The all-white squad: Crocombe, Paulson, Sale. Shout out Ollie Sale. We got Bindon, Boxall, Kakache, Payne, Pinnaker, Rue, Tommy Smith, Sutton, Garbett, Howison, Rufa, Staminich, Barbarousis, Just, Old, Rogerson, Wayne, Wood. What's just kind of a broad theme you see in this all-white squad compared to the squad who had a good draw, I'd say, against the USA and a tough loss against Mexico?
Yeah, but the other way around, so that the good draw came after the tough loss, which is the opposite of Blackcaps grid, is they actually they improved from the first game to the second game. They didn't get way worse. So that's nice. There is a little bit of there might be a little bit of Gary Stead about Darren Baisley, I think, sometimes. And it's maybe like Ollie Sale's selection could be considered part of that. But I also think there's a few instances in this squad where there is a younger guy, specifically, I think the goalkeeping stocks are there. I think there's a couple of attackers, maybe. There's some cases you can make for guys who are either emerging into the squad or from just guys who haven't been picked for a little while in good form. Andre De Jong, case in point, who aren't here because it's quite a consistent side, but then also I don't know, I quite like that he's established a top tier of how he wants to, where he sees the selections, what his depth chart is or whatever. And even for games against Malaysia and Tahiti, I think, did you say Malaysia, the game is in Auckland Day, and then the Tahiti game, for some reason, they're playing it in Vanuatu, I think. The Tahiti one is a World Cup qualifier, part of a little group stage thing, and the Malaysia game is just because there's 4 teams in a group, so there's 3 World Cup qualifiers of the next 2 windows, which meant you can fit 2 games in a thing, so let's bring over a team and have a friendly game, which is cool. It's at home, it's against a team we should beat, or at least very, very much capable of beating. Should really win all 4 of their games over this window and the next window, so that's all good stuff. And I did look at the squad and thought, that is not full strength. I wasn't expecting it to be full strength. I thought there'd be a few guys who would be rested, but actually working through it and seeing the recent squads and who, cross-referencing who's not there, who has been there recently. Because I can have a couple gripes about so-and-so's form deserves to be recalled or whatever, but then you have to drop someone. But looking at the I don't know, the pecking order that Baisley's established and who he hasn't picked here. Wilkins was in the last squad. Grieve hasn't been in there for a little bit. McCoward isn't there. Singh isn't there. those guys, Matt Diaz was in one squad a little while ago and hasn't been available again since. But all those guys are injured. So those aren't droppings or not being reselected. It's they've been injured. Grieve went off in the first half of his most recent game and probably doesn't have the form to demand a recall anyway. Wilkins hasn't played since getting injured and having to withdraw from the last All White squad. McCowart did make it back to the bench recently for Silkeborg, but obviously that's after the squad was probably already picked. Like it's too late, not ready. Singh has yet to debut for his club in Portugal after also withdrawing from the last All White squad. Other players who aren't there, like Max Mata hasn't been picked, but that's just because Ben Waine is in that spot ahead. And how many number nines you're going to pick when your captain is Chris Wood? Like there's just you pick someone who might actually get some minutes, which is a more versatile, wider forward in that situation, which they've done with Logan Rogerson. Bill Tuiloma's not there. Bill Tuiloma shouldn't be there because he was there last time he came off the bench in both games, but he was there as like a late call up because of Wilkins' injury. Tuiloma hasn't played anything other than reserve football for his club team for quite a while, so that's not form that gets you back in there. The only two I'd say who are not there, who I think could have been there, are Finn Sermon and Joe Bell. And the difference between them and some of these other guys like Stamanic, Garbett, Wood, or like the Kakache, these fellas being available and turning up and playing. Difference between Sermon and Bell and them is that they're at the start of their seasons. These guys are at the end of their seasons. The MLS only has about 3 or 4 weeks left until playoffs. And Finn Sermon hasn't played yet, but his coach is on record as saying he wants to get him some minutes before the end. So just sticking around, training, being available there. He wouldn't necessarily be a starter for the All Whites anyway, so it just makes sense for him to stick with his club and keep embedding there. And Joe Bell, it's his, again, like this Norwegian season, 5 or 6 games left, I think. And his Viking club are trying to qualify for Europe. They're trying to get into the top 4, possibly even second in Norway. And he could play. He would be eligible. It would mean flying all the way back to halfway around the world and then back again because other guys in the squad are doing similar things, but they're in a situation where they're early in the season. They could probably afford to miss the next game if they're feeling a little sore after the travel. Joe Bell's not. Like he missed a game with suspension 2 weeks ago and his team got thrashed. He came back and they won 4-1 on the weekend. So he's an extremely influential player for Viking. He plays 90 minutes basically every game, and he just can't afford to get injured at this stage of the season. We have other good midfielders, and these are not priority games. They're priority outcomes. We need to get a nice little win against Malaysia just for form and confidence. Need to win the World Cup qualifiers because we're trying to qualify for a World Cup. But we can do that with A-League players filling in some of these spots. So that's kind of the gist of the squad. Is that it's quite close to full strength, but there are 1 or 2 little aspects where just being fair on players in their club situation, but not as many as I thought. I thought maybe Marko Stamanic wouldn't play, or maybe Chris Wood. Well, it's hard to keep Chris Wood out of All Whites games, especially these kind of ones where he will be eyeing up goals. We want to come in and add to his already record All Whites tally, but Ben Old maybe was this guy I was a little bit surprised to see. Maybe he'd stick in France and hang around. But all these guys are basically coming back for these games. So there's always a great environment around these All Whites camps. Like the guys love playing, representing their country. It's just a matter of getting some results. But these are the kind of games where they should be able to get nice, comfortable victories. And because they've picked a strong squad, well, we'll get to see a strong squad. We'll get to see hopefully Chris Wood getting some goals at North Harbour Stadium or wherever it is.
I did have a realization watching Chris Wood play for Nottingham Forest this weekend. Did they lose that game?
Yeah, they lost 1-0 to Fulham. It was Fulham scored an early second half penalty.
And Chris
Did you watch the whole game? Because I only watched the highlights. Did Woodsy do anything good?
He got a couple of offsides. Good stuff there, as is usually the case for the Woodsman. But the realization I had, and this kind of frames, I had to peep this awareness because it kind of puts into perspective what we do. But I was like, I'm watching Chris Wood the same way I watched Steven Adams play basketball, where no matter where the ball is, I'm watching Chris Wood and Steven Adams. So I understand when other people don't know what Steven Adams or Chris Wood are doing. Because when they watch football or basketball, they're watching the ball. But when I watch Chris Wood, I'm watching Chris Wood. Like, I'm not there for anything else with Nottingham Forest. Couldn't give two damns about what Fulham are doing. I'm watching Chris Wood. I'm watching Chris Wood work backwards. I'm watching Chris Wood create space. I'm watching Chris Wood go offside. I'm watching everything to do with Chris Wood. In the same way when I'm watching NBA and Steven Adams is playing, I'm only watching Steven Adams. So I'm seeing everything Steven Adams does. And that was just a realization for me, because I'm like, okay, I can't really expect anyone else to know how awesome Steven Adams or Chris Wood is, because they don't care about him the same way I care about him, the same way I watch him. So it was just something that I had to take on board. And like, I still find it funny because in that team, who's the guy who I said was a really good passer for Nottingham Forest? Didn't play against Fulham.
Morgan Gibbs-White.
Yeah. So there's players like that. There's other players in the Nottingham Forest team who, like, you're like, okay, Nottingham Forest win a penalty. Who's going to take the penalty? Surely it's one of the, step over gods. Surely it's one of the attacking players who's just silky. And I can imagine the joy on the opposition team fans and the just like, for a Nottingham Forest fan who doesn't know anything about Chris Wood, when Chris Wood steps up to take the penalty. Because if I'm not a Kiwi and I'm a Fulham fan in that game and I'm watching Chris Wood step up for the penalty and I've seen the razzle-dazzle from all the other players, I'm like, praise Jah that Chris Wood's taking this penalty, because he's just kind of like a big Kiwi boy who plays striker, who could also play centre defender. Why is he taking the penalty? But in my mind, I know as a Kiwi Chris Wood fan, Chris Wood's going to score the penalty. And it's a very specific Kiwi sports thing that I don't think anyone else would care about. But I care about it. So shout out to Chris Wood. Are there any other flying Kiwis?
Steven Adams' free throws were as good as Chris Wood's penalties, I think rebounding-wise, they've got a lot in common there. I think Chris Wood is a great rebounder in his own footballing way, winning aerials, getting up and getting the ball. Same way that Steven Adams goes up and gets the ball, brings it down, gets it under control, flips it off to a teammate. The free throw penalty thing doesn't quite translate, though.
No, the thing for
maybe in the Rockets.
The thing for Steven Adams is he would blaze a path for Ja Morant.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone who's watching the game, they're just like, holy cow, Ja Morant, he just went straight to the basket. And yeah, he's an amazing athlete, incredible basketball player. But as a Kiwi sports nerd, I've literally just watched Steven Adams drag two men, two 6'5" men out of the way. And then Ja Morant's gone in that space. That's the equivalent to Chris Wood. But we have other football to talk about. We have some National League football, Flying Kiwis football. Didn't see a lot of Flying Kiwis in action over the weekend. We did have a debut for Michaela Foster at Durham. She's taken over from Neil Wagner for Durham. Neil Wagner.
They're both lefties.
Maybe Neil Wagner can return to help the Blackcaps. Oh, wait, he got injured after one game for Durham. So there didn't seem like as much Flying Kiwis. We do have Maggie Jenkins. She scored in Turkey, so that's good. What's your pick? Do you have any... we got to try and narrow down the National League chit-chat. So unless you've got some Flying Kiwis you want to talk about, were there a couple of storylines strictly football? Because I know you got some broadcasting observations and maybe some complaints, but let's keep it positive.
We don't have that much time on the...
Yeah, National League, like best players from the opening weekend, best team, best performance, or something like that.
Yeah, I will just say on the Flying Kiwi stuff, if you're looking for like, because I do the same thing. I'm watching Nottingham Forest. I'm only focusing on Chris Wood. Like I try to keep a bigger picture of the context of what he's doing, but specifically, I'm looking for the actions where he's involved. What's he doing? How's he influencing stuff? My favorite of all Flying Kiwis players to do that with at the moment, because I'm doing that for any game I watch with Kiwi players. I'm trying to track the Kiwi involved. My favorite of all is CJ Bott, and it's not even close at the moment. Like she just is that because they played against Leicester City played against Arsenal on the weekend. Unfortunately, CJ Bott did have a pass back to a goalkeeper which got intercepted. Alessio Russo jumped the passing lane and just stole it and then whipped it in, and that was the 1-0 goal that determined the outcome there. So a mistake from Bott, but other than that, she's just like out there against some of the best wingers in the world, like monstering people, like barging them over, doing Annessa Biddle things. So we found a Chris Woods, Stephen Adams comparison, and now we'll find a CJ Bott and Annessa Biddle comparison. So there's that. National League wise, because there are a couple of games where the broadcast was sketchy, so unfortunately I didn't really get to see stuff. I would have loved to see more of Wellington United in the women's competition, going up to Western Springs and winning 3-2 away from home against the Auckland side like that. And also, there were highlights at least of this game, but Waterside Karori getting a 1-0 draw at home against Auckland United. I think the most fascinating thing about it so far is that the two cup winners, the two National Cup winners, Chatham and Cage, who also won their domestic leagues, who are also the defending champions of the National League, neither of them actually won this weekend. So Auckland United were held to a 1-0 draw. They have, well, this is in the women's comp, they had won 29 out of 31 games across all competitions this season. Oceania Champions League, NRFL Premiership, Kate Shepherd Cup, won all those trophies, trying to win a National League. They'd won 29 out of 31 games, held to a 1-0 draw by Waterside Karori. So a huge result from the Warfies, who didn't really stack their team at all in terms of guest players like a few of the other ones did. In fact, the biggest guest player in that game was Kaylee Ward, former Waterside Karori striker, who's now apparently just going to play for Auckland United. So they've improved their team upon already being the best team, but they dropped points in week one, and it's such a short season. If they drop points again against Eastern Suburbs in a tricky one next week, suddenly they're a little bit up against it to qualify for the final. And Wellington Olympic also didn't win. They played a game in just beautiful Christchurch behind me on the broadcast that was against Coastal Spirit. It was a Coastal Spirit home game, but they played it at Ferry Mead Bays' ground with the lovely lush green mountains behind, and Coastal Spirit were fantastic defensively in particular, just absolutely locked it down against the most dangerous, most potent attacking club in the country, and Wellington Olympic held them to a 0 draw. And I'm not sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's the only game this season that Wellington Olympic haven't scored in. So exciting stuff there in terms of just what that sets up for the competition, because the women's competition in particular, I still think Wellington Olympic they'll score a bunch of goals next week. They'll be fine. Auckland City had a win against Birkenhead, so it's still probably it's hard not to think those two teams are destined to meet in the final again. Although Kashmir Technical did have a 4-0 win against Western Suburbs, really impressive there. Just the way they like sat in, defended stoutly, but then attacked really quickly on the break. And Garvin Coughlin was amazing as he scored a goal, got 2 assists. He was brilliant. Napier City Rovers actually also had a 4-0 win against Western Springs, which I think was a lot closer than it sounds. That game was not quite as one-sided as the scoreline appears. It was 3-0 after 26 minutes. Oscar Folds coming back from his unfortunate trial experiences in Scandinavia. Actually, I thought was quite rusty. He had a couple chances throughout that game where he could have scored a hat-trick if he'd been a bit more potent, but he did score a thumping finish in the 8th minute with the first chance of the game. So that was good. Napier City Rovers look like they could be a pretty dangerous team if they can do that to Western Springs. Kashi Tech as well with their result, but it does still feel like Auckland City, Wellington Olympic, we're going to need a few more upsets before we start to think of those two teams as not being the front runners. But the women's competition, if Auckland United have already dropped points, which puts them a little bit vulnerable, well, I think Southern United are as good as they were last year, and they made the final. I think Canterbury United have improved a lot. The Wellington Phoenix reserve should be better than they were last season. Didn't necessarily show that against Canterbury United on the weekend, but then for the first half, first 35 minutes, they were pretty good. They were the better team, and then they just kind of, fell from 1-0 up and lost 4-1. But the Auckland teams are always pretty good, and the thing about clubs like Western Springs and Eastern Suburbs is they have the resources to get better and prioritize the national leagues. So even if they were a little bit inconsistent, well, quite a bit inconsistent throughout the winter season, they should be stronger for these games. West Coast Rangers certainly, they've come in looking like they were the only team that could run Auckland United close during the winter season, and this might be their first National League campaign, but they look like a team that can beat most anyone else in the country. Like they're excellent. And unfortunately, you do have Central Football, who half of their squad was from last year's under-17s, who finished second in the National Youth League. And Central is always quite young, and the best of their players, before they get even to 20, they're moving to play for the Wellington Phoenix reserves now, because it's just a couple hours, well, less than a couple hours down the road. Central are always, this is sort of like the Napier, Palmerston, Northie kind of regions, central districts, but without the Nelson aspect of it. If you like to compare it to the cricket setup, they're always kind of the weakest team, and they're probably, because the rest of the competition is so strong, I think that's going to look even worse for them this year. So I have some fears for how they're going to track, but I honestly think, especially after the two Wellington clubs as well had really good results in the first week, the women's competition, you've got 9 teams there who anyone could beat anyone else except maybe Auckland United. Like it's that close, it's that competitive this year, and I don't even want to try to predict stuff, because it's that's the fun of it, So that competition especially is really well poised. We had enough to see from the men's competition to say that one's going to be very competitive as well. Good fun, great to have the National League back.
Favorite player from the opening weekend?
Women's competition, I might go with the Rose Morden as a familiar face in these kind of things. There's many weeks where she would have been capable of that, but she's just one of those players who fairly small, plays in the midfield, not a big player, but she just has the biggest engine of anyone. She's like dropping into defense to cover. She's making overlapping runs in the penalty area, covering basically every blade of grass, winning 100 tackles per game. And the men's comp, I just wanted to see the strikers. There's 3 import strikers this year who I think have throughout the winter season established themselves as like a step above. Lucas Meek, who's American for Western Suburbs, he kind of got pocketed by Kashmir Tech's defense. Didn't really get anything going. Looked like a frustrated game from him. Didn't get a lot of service either. Alejandro Steinwasser, I think it is, from Coastal Spirit. He tried hard, but it was a very tight defensive 0-0 draw. Didn't really see much from him. You might want to class Oscar Folds because he's half Kiwi, half Swedish, but grew up in Sweden. Maybe he counts for that. He did score a goal, but Garvin Coughlin once again with a goal and 2 assists and an extremely influential performance. Basically announced to everyone else, like, you think there are other import strikers who can challenge me? There are no other import strikers who can challenge me. He's still atop the mountaintop.
Big Donny, Garvin Coughlin.
He's a big Donny. Garvin Coughlin. I don't know exactly. He's okay. Irish.
Don Garvin.
Yeah.
Rightio. That is the Niche Cast. Big up yourself. We appreciate you listening. Hopefully you enjoy the yarns and all the Aotearoa sporting action. Big up yourself. Love yourself. Kia kaha. Stay beautiful. Church.